Hello. So first of all, thank you very much for coming here today. I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Aida, and I work as software developer at ThoughtWorks. But before that, I used to work 9 years as a QA. So 3 years ago, I was here in the Software Crafters, and I was talking about the testing pyramid and how to create a good testing strategy. And during that talk, I briefly introduced the main three different QA roles, and that was based in my experience as a QA. And then at the end of the talk, I realized that most of the questions were about that specific part. So I thought it would be an interesting topic to expand. But before we begin, do we have any QAs or testers in the room? Okay, no, everyone is developer. Well, I guess then you can teach your QAs how to improve. So let's start. Before we begin, I would like to thank all the sponsors and all the organization for making it possible to be here today. And let's start. So I want to start explaining what has been my journey since I started working and until today. So I studied telecommunications engineering, and during the last year of my career, I decided that I wanted to do an internship. And the company I was hired by, they decided, okay, you're going to be a very good test engineer because you are very organized and you pay a lot of attention to detail. And this is how I ended up as a test engineer. I didn't even know what was a tester or a QA. After that, I worked as a test engineer in a company and then as a QA engineer for a couple of companies. And even if you say that there is a title change in there, like the job that I was doing was exactly the same. So no big changes. The big change came with my next job when I was hired as a QA manager. So at the beginning, I was the only QA of the company. So as you can imagine, I was not doing any management work. I was just a QA engineer. But the work that I was doing at that moment was very different from the one that I was doing before. Then with time, the company started growing and they started hiring more QAs. And my job started little by little shifting from being an individual contributor to being a people manager, to the point where I didn't have time to be an individual contributor anymore. And even if I enjoyed a lot being a QA manager, I wasn't ready yet to completely give up the technical part. So I decided to come back and be a QA engineer in the same company. Then after some time, I guess I needed a new challenge, so I decided to change jobs. And I was hired as a QA lead by my current company. And here, like one more time, the job that I was doing was very, very different from the one that I was doing before, because I was not only testing, I was also developing. And being able to develop completely changed the way in which I was approaching testing. So I guess I enjoyed a lot being able to develop. So I decided to eventually change jobs, and I became a developer. And yeah, this is what I've been doing for the last 3 years. I'm a developer, but I still have a strong focus on testing, and I care a lot about quality. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to zoom out a little bit. And I want to zoom out a little bit, and I want to divide the different QA roles that I've been performing in 3 main phases, which are the following ones. So the first phase is QA 1.0. That was at the beginning of my career. Here I was working with Waterfall methodologies with him. I was pretty isolated from the team. Like Waterfall doesn't really promote a lot of collaboration between developers and QAs, and I was doing manual testing. The second phase is QA 2.0. Here I started working with Scrum, and Scrum, the idea is that all the team members are part of the development life cycle. So that allowed me to feel like another team member. And here I was still doing manual testing, but my focus shifted to doing automated testing, which, to be honest, was a lot more fun. The last phase, that's QA 3.0. Here I was still working with Scrum with some modifications, and I also adopted some extreme programming practices. Here, for the first time, I think because of the extreme programming practices, I started feeling that I was working with the team, and we had built in a quality mindset, so I was not the only one caring about quality. Good, so the next thing that I want to do is, now I want to go into each of the phases, and I want to explain them in detail. So we're going to start with the first level, that's going to be QA 1.0. So as a QA 1.0, I already mentioned I was working with Waterfall. And Waterfall, or classic Waterfall, was the first software development lifecycle that was widely used in order to ensure success of the projects. So the idea of Waterfall is that sequential, so there are no iterations. That means the project is divided in different phases, 6 phases in this case. We're going to start with the first phase, and we are not going to move to the next phase until we are finished with the current one. So the first one is requirement analysis. Here, stakeholders and a developer, typically a tech lead or the architect, they are going to gather together and they are going to define and document business requirements. Second phase, once the first one is finished, here the developer, again, typically is the tech lead or the architect, they are going to define the technical requirements. Once that's done, all the developers can start with implementation. And when the whole implementation is finished, the QA is going to do the testing. And they are going to test, they are going to open bugs, developers are going to fix the bugs, and when we are all happy with the quality, the developer can do the deployment, which is basically delivering the system to the final users. And then there is a last phase, maintenance phase. Here, anyone in the team can take part, and the idea is fixing bugs or enhancing the product. So as you can see, Waterfall, I think it's pretty simple, and all the stages are very well defined. However, it has several disadvantages. The first one is that the system is very rigid. All the requirements need to be defined at the very beginning, and then they cannot change. And we all know already that this is not how usually projects work. Then the second problem is that testing is a phase that comes after the whole development is done. That might lead to very late detection of bugs, okay? So because of this, some thought on implementing some iterative waterfall. So this means, okay, we are going to develop for 2 or 3 months, and then we are going to have a testing phase of maybe 15 days. During that testing phase, I'm going to fix major bugs, and then when those 15 days are gone, we're going to go back to the implementation, okay? So this is a lot better than what we had before, but it is still very painful for developers and for QAs, because testing still comes after a very long phase of development, so we are still going to find a lot of bugs. Another disadvantage that I did not mention is the lack of collaboration between developers and QAs. So implementation and testing are 2 very different phases that come one after each other, and that doesn't promote collaboration between developers and QA. And also this lack of collaboration is visualized. We can see that in the team topology, which many times looks like this. So here the first thing that we notice is that the QA is not part of the development team. And the second thing is that it's giving support to a lot of teams. Okay, I call this the superhero QA. You might think that this is not realistic, but I remember being hired for a company, being the first QA in that company, having to test everything, and I didn't have support. I was not part of the developers team, so it was kind of a difficult task. So here, what I want to highlight is that many companies, when they hire the first QA, they implement a topology like this. And this is a nightmare for a QA. You're new to a company, you have to test everything, and you're officially not part of the developers team. So you might get very little support to do your job. You cannot just hire someone, put them in a corner, and expect them to change how the whole department is working. That doesn't make any sense. So, well, the good thing about this, if there is any good thing, is that it's usually a transitory state until the company hires more QA. And eventually you reach a state where you only have to give support to a couple of teams, maybe 3. Again, this is better than what we had before, but it's still very painful because you need to keep a lot of context and you need to divide your time between different teams. So it is a lot of work, not easy. Okay, let's now talk about the responsibilities of the QA 1.0. And in order to do that, I'm going to present the testing pyramid, okay? So the testing pyramid, we know, is the tool to plan the testing effort for a project. And according to the original testing pyramid, we have to test at 3 different levels. At the bottom, we have unit tests. They are fast and they are cheap, so we should have lots of them. Then we have service tests, and at the top, we have UI tests. UI tests are slow and they are very expensive, so we should have just a few of them. From this whole pyramid, the QA 1.0 is only going to focus at the top of the pyramid, okay? Why? Why do you think this is happening? Well, because the QA 1.0 does not know about the internals of the application. So they are going to test the application through the UI, doing manual tests. And they are going to do that during the testing phase of the waterfall model. Okay? The lower part of the pyramid, we need to know about the internals of the applications, and we need to test that through automated tests. So developers are going to take care of that, and they are going to do this during the implementation phase of the waterfall model. So two things that I want to mention about the testing pyramid. The first thing is that it usually looks more like this one. Why? Well, either developers do not have enough time to test during the implementation phase, or maybe they are just relying on someone else to do that job. And then the QAs, they're creating tests, lots of tests at the top of the pyramid. What is the second thing that I want to mention? Well, testing. So according to this, the QA is only working during the testing phase of the waterfall model. But this is not true. I mean, the problem is that the waterfall model is only visualizing the text execution part that the QA is doing, but the QA is doing more than just executing tests. And in order to do that, in order to explain that, I'm going to present the testing lifecycle. This is the testing lifecycle that I was following when I was a QA 1.0. It has 4 different phases. The first one is the preparation phase. So remember, as a QA, I was not part of the requirement analysis. Okay? So I needed this phase to be able to review the requirements and understand what was being done. Next phase is the specification phase. So here is where I start creating my test cases. I'm going to apply test design techniques in order to create those test cases. That way, I can ensure that I'm going to have a good testing coverage. And yeah, I remember like spending quite a lot of time writing those test cases because I was writing them manually in a tool called Test Management Tool. I remember that it wasn't fun, and I used to spend lots of hours doing that job. The next phase is going to be the execution phase. So during that phase, I'm going to go to my test management tool, I'm going to get my test cases that I wrote, and I'm going to execute all the steps and see what's the result. And then there is a last phase, which is the completion phase. So this is about generating a final report with the results of all the executions. So this is for me like when you cook. Okay, you go to your friend's house, they do a super nice dish, and you are like, hey, give me the recipe. So you're going to note all the steps super well, and then you go home. After 1 month, you do the recipe following all the steps, and then you taste it. Cool. So the preparation and specification phases, they happen during the implementation phase of the waterfall model, and execution and completion, they happen during the testing phase of the waterfall model. So here we can clearly see that the QA is doing more than the waterfall is telling us. Okay, there is hidden work that we are not visualizing. So yes, testing is more than just executing tests, and it was a lot of work. And everything was manual, nothing was automated. So I guess this was okay during the 18s when we didn't have tools like Selenium to automate the UI, but it was a QA 1.0, I think 9 years ago. So why was I doing all this work? Why was I spending hours and hours documenting manual test cases? Well, I guess because I didn't know better, but I really wish I did. Okay, let's sum up a bit with QA 1.0. The good is that I got to learn the foundations of testings, test types, test design techniques, defect management, and I got to learn this as a formal learning, so I'm very grateful for that because many QAs nowadays, they just learn by doing. The bad is that the bad things are the feedback comes a bit late, there is lack of communication between developers and QAs, and the testing strategy is focused at the top of the pyramid and involves lots of manual testing. Okay, so now we're going to level up a bit and we are going to explain the QA 2.0. Good, so QA 2.0, as a QA 2.0, I started working with agile methodologies. Agile methodologies are iterative, so that means requirements and solutions are going to evolve with time, okay? And this is the first biggest difference with the waterfall model. The second one is that teams are cross-functional, self-organized teams. So there are many frameworks that implement Agile, but probably the most adopted one or the most well-known one is Scrum. So I'm going to quickly review Scrum. The idea is that requirements are captured in user stories, and those are prioritized inside the product backlog. Then we are going to divide the development in iterations, and we are going to call them sprints. And the idea is that at the end of the sprint, you should be able to deliver something to the user. Inside the sprints, we have 4 events happening. We have the sprint planning. The team gathers together, and they decide what they are going to deliver at the end of the sprint, or what is the commitment. Then we have the sprint daily. That happens every day. Team gathers together, and they talk about the progress. They usually use the Scrum Board to visualize in which step of the development life cycle each story is. And the most important thing are talking about blockers. And then at the end of the sprint, we have the showcase and the retrospective. Showcase is the moment for the team to show to the PO and the stakeholders what they've built during the sprint. And retrospective, well, is the chance for the team to talk about the things that they want to improve. So again, I think Scrum is quite simple, very well defined, but there is something that we need to know about the Scrum. And it is that Scrum is incomplete, and that is on purpose. So there are things that you will need to do, but Scrum is not going to tell you how. Okay, so this is on purpose to give teams flexibility. Okay, so for example, how do I discover what needs to be done, or what happens before I have my user stories prioritized in my product backlog? Scrum is not going to tell you how to do that, so you need to figure out. And usually teams struggle a lot with this part. Another thing that teams struggle maybe not that much with is the Scrum Board. So I think it always amazes me how creative teams can get when they are defining the columns or the stages of the Scrum Board. Yeah, if you look on internet, this is what you get. 3 columns, to do in progress done, but this is not enough for most of the teams. And in fact, I have never worked in a team that has only 3 columns. I think like, at least, the thing that all the teams have in common that they add is these 2 columns for QAs. So how would this work? Okay, you're gonna have your story in to do when it is refined and ready to be picked up. Then the developers are gonna move the story to in progress when they start working on it, and when they finish, they are gonna move it to ready to QA. So this ready to QA is like the to-do column, but for QAs, okay? And then QAs start working in the story, they move in to in QA, and when they finish, they move it to done. So what do we have in here? Okay, now we have 2 different phases, one for development and one for testing, one for developers and one for QAs. So if we compare 2 waterfall stages, aren't we doing the same thing but at the story level? And you all know the answer, like the answer is yes, and that's why many people is saying that Scrum is like a mini waterfall process. But I think the problem is not Scrum, the problem is how we implement Scrum. So having a board like this brings several problems. The first one I already mentioned, 2 different phases, feedback comes very late. Imagine the developer works in a story, and when they finish, they move to ready to QA. The QA, when they have time, they start working in the story, and they find a bug. They open the bug. But meanwhile, the developer has started working in another story, and it's not until they finish that story that they can start working on the bug. They work in the bug, they close the bug. You can imagine, right? The QA has started working in another story, and it's not until they finish working in that story that they pick the bug. And hopefully, there is no more bugs, we can close everything, we are done. So there is a lot of ping-pong effect, plus the time the QA has to spend opening bugs. And then there is the thing of if teams have only 1 QA, there might be a bit of a testing bottleneck. Okay, now we're going to talk about team topology. So Scrum defines 3 different roles. We have the product owner. This is the person that represents the customer and the stakeholders. And we have to work with them to understand what is that we need to do and what are the priorities. Then we have the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is the person that makes sure that the team is following Scrum properly. They follow the Scrum values. They facilitate meetings. They protect the team. And then we have the development team. The development team is the people that is actually doing the delivery. And here we can find developers, QAs, UX, all the roles that you need to deliver. And then outside the team, we can see the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are the people that has an interest, an investment in the project. And the product owner should work with them in order to understand and to represent their interests. So good thing about this team topology is that QA is part of the development team. So I remember how happy I was when I started working with Scrum, because suddenly I was not alone anymore. I had a team that was supporting my day-to-day. And even if I was testing and developers were developing, the collaboration and communication had improved a lot. Cool, so another good thing of being a QA 2.0, apart from working with Scrum and being part of the team, was doing automated tests. So now my focus shifted from doing manual tests to doing automated tests. And that doesn't mean that I was not doing manual tests at all. So usually for every story, the process was the following. I would first manually test it, I would open bugs, and then I would select a subset of tests that I wanted to automate, and I would automate them, okay? So that I could have a testing suite that I could execute anytime. Cool. So as a QA 2.0, I was doing lots of different types of tests. I was doing end-to-end UI tests, end-to-end API tests, cross-browser tests, code-dev tests, and even visual automated tests. But as you can see, all of those tests were still focused at the top of the pyramid. What happens with the lower part of the pyramid? Well, I still didn't have any knowledge about the internals of the application, so I couldn't make those tests. So that's why developers are still going to take care of those tests, and they're going to do it during the in progress column. So, if we compare this to the waterfall model, like it feels like we have the same thing, no? But now the difference is only that the QA is also automating. Well, not really. So there was a problem with Waterfall, that it was not visualizing all the work that the QA was doing, okay? And we learned that because we reviewed the testing lifecycle. So now I want to review with you how the testing lifecycle is going to look in an agile environment. The first phase, the preparation phase, well, we don't need it anymore because the QA now is part of the sprint planning, and this is where everyone in the team understands what needs to be done. So they don't need a specific phase to understand what it is that they need to build. Then we have a specification and execution phases. Those are going to happen together, and I'm going to explain later how exactly. And then finally, we have a completion phase. Now I have automated tests. I don't need to create a report myself. There is going to be a tool that is going to be doing that for me. And all of that is going to happen in the QA column of Scrum. So now we don't have like these hidden tasks that the QA is doing, but no one knows about. And yeah, here if we compare to the cooking thingy, there is no recipe that the QA is going to be following blindly, okay? We need to learn by doing and yeah, just adapt to each moment. So yeah, specification and execution phases. I already said there are two types of tests that we're going to do, manual testing and automated testing. So manual testing is going to be conducted through exploratory testing. Doing exploratory testing doesn't mean that you're not going to plan your test at all. It means that you're going to be doing it in a very lightweight way, okay? And in order to do that, you can, for example, use mind maps in order to plan your test cases very, very quickly. Because here the idea is that we maximize the execution part, because it's going to be the one that is going to ultimately give us value. Then we have the automated testing. We have our test cases already defined with mind maps, so we are going to select the ones that we like and we are going to automate them. And now we don't have to spend hours documenting the test cases in this test management tool, because the code is our documentation, and also reports are going to be automatically generated. Cool, so let's sum up. The good things is that we are doing Scrum, so we have earlier feedback, and we have improved communication and collaboration a lot. And also now we have a testing strategy that focuses on automation. The bad is that the way in which many teams implement Scrum feels a bit like a mini waterfall process. I said feedback comes earlier, but it's still late. I said communication collaboration is better, but we can still make it better, a lot better. And also the testing strategy is still focused at the top of the pyramid. Cool. So now we are going to level up again. We are going to level up to QA 3.0. Yep. So as a QA 3.0, I was still working with Scrum, and I'm going to do a Scrum because I'm going to apply some modifications to the original Scrum framework, and I'm not sure if I can call eat Scrum still. Okay, but before I do that, I'm going to simplify the Scrum Board. So there are a few changes that I'm going to do. I'm going to remove the ready to QA and the in QA columns, and I'm going to add a new column, the stakeholder validation column. So the idea here is that, okay, the story is going to stay in progress while it is developed, tested, and until it is deployed in production and tested in a deployed environment, okay? And until that is done, I cannot move it to the next stage. Stakeholder validation, this is for stakeholders to be able to validate the implementation of the story. So for example, the PO can check that the business rules are working as they are expecting. Maybe this is a bit specific to my environment because I work in consultancy. And in our case, I know Scrum says PO is part of the team, but in our case, the PO is from the client. So for us, it's more like a stakeholder. If you don't have this case, I don't know, maybe you can remove it or adapt it to your use case. Cool. So if we map to the waterfall phases, now we can see that for the first time, implementation, testing, and deployment, they happen all in the in progress column. Having a board like this has several benefits. So what do I want to achieve by removing these two QA columns? Well, I want to allow development and testing to be done simultaneously and by the same people, okay? I'm going to have faster feedback, and I'm going to remove the ping pong effect. And now I'm not going to waste time opening bugs, because if I have a bug, I'm just going to fix it at the moment, and I don't need to document anything or to lose any context. Also, we're going to remove the testing bottleneck. And then, what do I want to achieve by adding this validation column? Well, I want stakeholders to validate the feature as soon as it is deployed, without having to wait until the end of the sprint or for the showcase to be able to see what's been done. Cool. Okay, now, I like my Scrum Board. I'm going to apply some changes to the Scrum events. The first one is going to be removing the showcase. Why? Well, in our case, it wasn't working very well. I remember spending some time, quite some time, preparing very nice showcases. And I remember that many times POs and stakeholders, they didn't have time to come to our showcases. So we ended up doing the showcase just for ourselves. But we already knew what we had built, so it didn't make a lot of sense. The second change is going to be adding a discovery process and involving technical people in that process. So the process of a feature is going to have two phases, okay? Discovery phase and execution phase. And the objective of the discovery phase is to discover and define what needs to be done. So the PO is going to be the one driving this process, and they are going to involve stakeholders. If you have dependencies with other teams, they might involve some team members to some meetings. And the most important thing is involving one or two technical team members from the team, and we are going to call them feature leads, okay? So the feature leads are going to be the people that have deep knowledge about the feature besides the PO. So the output of the discovery process is having a prioritized list of user stories. And I think the PO and the feature leads should work together writing those stories. I know a lot of people think it's not the best use of time of developers or QAs. And I half agree, because I don't know, in my experience, the output is that stories are better written, and then during the development, we have less open questions, that means less blockers, and everything is faster. The third change is going to be adding a new event, tech huddles. So tech huddles are going to be a 15-minute meeting that happen right after the daily, every day. And the objective, or the thing that we want to achieve with this, is giving technical people in the team some space every day to be able to discuss or share technical findings or any blocker that they have. And with this, what we want to achieve is that we want to improve communication and sharing knowledge. Okay. So, apart from the things that I mentioned before, as a QA 3.0, I also started working with some stream programming practices. XP, or stream programming, is an agile framework that aims to deliver high-quality software. And this is by no means a complete list of all the practices. This is just some of the practices that I adopted, and I believe they made my work completely different. So the first one is going to be pair programming. We've talked about pair programming a lot today. The idea is that developers do not work alone. Every story or task is given to a pair of developers, and they work together in developing and testing. So the change that I want to propose here is that the QA is also going to be part of one of those pairs, and they are going to work in developing and testing. Okay? So I think this is a very important change. Okay? So I think QA should start developing. I know a lot of people doesn't agree with me. They don't think it's necessary for QAs to develop, but I completely disagree. I think being able to develop is going to give you the tools that you need to be able to approach testing in a completely different way. Because if you develop now, for the first time, you're going to know about the internals of the application. And for the first time, you're going to be able to focus at the lower part of the pyramid. Remember the fast and cheap tests. Okay? That you might be thinking, okay, but if the QA is developing, then who is doing the testing? Well, I already said the pair that is doing the implementation of a story is developing and testing it. And I think this is one of the first important changes to build a quality mindset. Like everyone in the team needs to start testing, not only the QA. Okay, but some people might say, but Aida, developers are not as good as QAs testing. Well, I think this is because if you have a QA in the team, you probably are relying on someone else to do that job. So, yeah, why do we all need to do the same thing? And other people say, well, the QAs are better testing because they have this broader context. Well, but think about it. Like, if you are building a feature, you should understand very well what it is that you are doing. Otherwise, like, how can you get it right? So I think it's important that everyone understands very well what it needs to be done, and everyone gets this bigger picture, broader view, not only the QA. Now I'm going to change. The second practice was this TDD, test-driven development. Well, we know this. You create the test, you implement the code, then you refactor. This is another good practice to build quality mindset because you are thinking about testing even before coding. The second practice is collective ownership. So here the idea is that everyone in the team should be able to change any line of code, okay? For adding a feature, for fixing a bug, for whatever. So no one should be a blocker for changes. Okay, how can I get this collective ownership? Well, you should understand very well the different parts of the project. And there are different things that you can do in order to do that. First is working in many different stories. So if you are pairing, make sure that you switch pairs often. I know that when we are pairing, we like to stay in the story from the beginning till the end. But I want to challenge that. I think it's better to switch often because you're going to go to another story, you're going to bring new ideas to that story, and you're going to learn about many different things. So for example, in my team, we change every Monday and Wednesday, and that is fixed, and it works very well. Like at the beginning, it's a bit hard. At the beginning, I didn't want to do it, but then you get used to it, and yeah, it works very well. The other things that you can do is sharing a lot. So you can use tech huddles in order to share and create coding conventions so that everyone is aligned on how to build things. Okay, let's now talk about the team topology. Well, so the Scrum Master role, I think this role made a lot of sense when companies started adopting agile methodologies because people didn't know how that worked. But I think it's not the case anymore. I think we are all quite used to work with agile methodologies. So I think the biggest value that they bring to companies nowadays is probably helping with facilitation, and I believe that can be distributed within the team. So we're going to stop having the Scrum Master role. And then the last thing is the responsibilities of the QA 3.0. They are going to be the same responsibilities as the developer. Okay, so they are going to develop and they are going to test. And for the first time, they're going to test at the different levels of the pyramid. And for the first time, the pyramid is going to stop looking like an ice cream cone and it's going to look like an actual pyramid. Okay, and everything is going to happen while the story is in progress, of course. Okay, so let's sum up a little bit. The good thing is that we are going to only take the good parts of the Scrum, okay, the parts that are working for us. Also that we are going to adopt XP practices, and they are going to help us building the quality mindset. We're going to have very early feedback and lots of communication and collaboration between QAs and developers. And also our testing pyramid now is not focused at the top of the pyramid. The bad is that, well, the team needs to be very mature to work in this way. Like I talk a lot about pairing, but pairing is difficult, pairing is tiring. Well, we know, because we've been talking about pairing a lot. Not everyone likes pairing, but also we work with a lot of practices that I didn't mention, and it's not easy to work that way. We had continuous deploy. Having continuous deploy means that you need to have a very, very good testing coverage. We also had trunk-based development, feature toggles, so lots of practices, and yeah, it's a bit difficult. The other thing is that it is hard. Like, I remember that what it used to be my main job as a QA 2.0, it was now a very little part of my job as a QA 3.0. So I had to basically relearn everything, and I was very, very, very lucky because I had a team that was supporting all of that, but it was still very hard. Okay. So now we are ready to face Bowser, okay? We are already QA 3.0. And you may be wondering, no, maybe not you, but your QAs in your team may be wondering, Aida, how can I get there? Well, if you are a QA 1.0, I think you should be a bit worried, okay? I think you should be making the transition towards a QA 2.0 today, no, tomorrow. No one should be a QA 1.0 nowadays, okay? If you are a QA 2.0, good. I think that's where most of the people is today. It's not perfect, but we have a Scrum, which gives a bit of a structure to teams, and we're automating, so that's fun. However, I cannot challenge you, so please challenge your QAs to transition and to take a step further and to become a QA 3.0, okay? QA 3.0, I think in my experience, yeah, it's the optimal state, okay? With the knowledge that I have today, I think it's the optimal state. And yeah, I've gathered some tips that might be useful for you to make the transition. So, the first one is shared goal. So usually developer's goal is to develop and QA's goal is to test. I think instead we need to have a common goal, which is delivering quality software. If you want to improve quality, you need a plan and you need the whole team involved in that plan. So tell your QAs to stop doing their fancy end-to-end test routes alone, okay? Because the QA 3.0 works with the team. And in the same way that you agree in your architecture or you have coding conventions, sit together and agree on your testing strategy so that everyone is aligned on how to approach it. Then something that is very important, I think, is having well-defined user stories. So a good user story is small. A good user story contains all the information, it's complete, so no open questions. It has all the acceptance criteria, and well, in many teams, people find that it's very useful to include some testing notes so that it is a bit easier to do that part. And also, it is very important that the whole team understands very well the user story, okay? So do not skip refinements. Then adopt practices like TDD and pairing. They are going to help you build a quality mindset. With TDD, I already said, you're going to start thinking about testing even before coding. With pairing, you're going to have another pair of eyes looking at your code, so the result is going to be better. Plus, pairing is a great tool to share a lot of knowledge and to grow people super fast. Then dedicate enough time to testing, because testing is also important, and automate. Automate all the manual, boring tasks, okay? No one wants to spend hours doing manual, repetitive tasks. And finally, invest on making testing easier, because that way you're not going to have an excuse not to do it. So, just a final note on this. Well, these are the things that help me, and I hope they can help you or maybe inspire you to build the quality mindset. Cool. So I guess this is the question that everyone wants me to answer. And I'm going to do that by explaining why I became a developer. So when I was a QA 3.0, I was very happy because, yeah, now I was not the only one caring about quality. Everyone was caring about quality, okay? So yeah, in my opinion, it was the optimal way to work. And there was no way I could go back to being a QA 2.0. But I knew that if I changed teams or company, I would probably have to. So I decided to become a developer, okay? So that way I could keep on testing and developing. Happy. So then I started in a new team, okay, as a developer. And it was a team without QAs. And everything went very well. So I started thinking a lot about the QA role. Like, what is wrong with it? Do we really need it? And at that moment, these were very hard questions to make to myself because I had been a QA not so long ago. And I think the problem is that how we bring the role of the QA inside the team. Like we have a quality problem, and that's when we bring the QA to the team. We don't bring a QA if we don't have any problem. And then we don't give them enough support. So it is very hard to improve quality in that setup. So that's why when I was working in this team without QAs, I didn't feel that we needed a QA because the whole team already cared about quality and the whole team was testing. So, and we had processes and practices that were supporting this built-in quality mindset, okay? So if you want to increase quality, quality needs to be a priority, and it needs to be a priority for everyone, not just for the QA. So I think that we don't really need the role of the QA inside the teams. What we need is the testing knowledge, and we need everyone to have that knowledge in the team, not only the QA, okay? So of course, in order to get there, there are several things that you can do. Of course, bringing someone with a QA background is going to help, or even a developer that has a strong focus on testing. So I think that if you are trying to improve quality and you're bringing a QA to do that job, and the job of improving quality is just the goal of the QA, I think the answer to this question is yes. So that's it. Thank you very much. Questions?
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted to ask you about the user test cases because as a developer, for example, when I found myself talking with many QAs when we were like working Scrum Agile at some point, and we had this kind of discussion where I find myself trying to discuss with them who should be responsible about writing the user test cases. If it should be the developer or should be the QA. Because if I'm the one as a developer, if I'm the one who should write those user test cases, maybe I will be influence on those QA tests on you know? Maybe I'm not objective enough. So, who do you think that should be responsible for writing those user test cases?
So, yeah, in my opinion, like what I'm trying to go is that QA and developer, they are the same. Yeah. The same, okay? So developers or QA is the same. So I think maybe the problem is that you need to understand what are those use cases, no? Yeah. Before trying to write them. So maybe work with the PO or BA in your team in order to understand what are the main flows, and then it doesn't really matter who is the one writing them. No?
And also, I agree. And also, when you said the QA starting coming with the ceremonies and everything, they should have the knowledge enough to write the
You answer. I have two questions. You answer number one. That is, what is the difference between the QA 3.0 and the developer? That is
focus. I don't know. Like there are front-end developers, back-end developers, so you can have a developer who is more knowledgeable in testing. Okay. So.
But still, at the end, I think it's the same because you need a developer to know how to test, and you need the QA to know how to develop. So it's difficult to align on what is the difference. Okay? Because I had a conversation like 1 week ago of not hiring a QA. That I was thinking that the QA should be done by the developers, not hiring a third person to do this. But just a little bit of the thing I wanted to say is you said that the team has to be mature enough to have this mindset, no? And when I had this conversation with the team, my impression was, okay, we are not mature enough to have, everyone has this mindset. So at the end, do you think if the team is not mature enough, we will need a QA 2.0 key engineer to become maybe the future as 2.0? Is a solution, or can we can have kind of a direct solution to have this version?
It depends on why your team cannot get there. If they cannot get there because they are lacking some knowledge or they need some help, maybe hiring someone can help. But if they are not getting there because they don't want to get there, like I don't want to write those end-to-end tests because that's not my job, then you are going to hardly get there, no?
Yeah, it's one of the minds.
So for me, yeah, the biggest problem is not the technical gap. For me, the biggest problem is the processes that the team follows. So I guess you need to agree first, where do you want to get? Or what is your ideal state? Because your ideal state might be different from my ideal state. And then you need to maybe have a plan. Okay, what are the things that I can do in order to get there, like, little by little, you know?
The problem is sometimes they set on the development team saying we don't have the user stories well defined to know what to test. But at the end, this requires a lot of work at the beginning to exactly specify what you need to test. At the end, it's a 2.0 QA because you need exactly someone to write exactly what you have.
Or you can have feature leads, and the feature leads can be a developer, can be a QA. No?
Okay.
I would say that everyone doesn't know enough to know what to test at the beginning, maybe they need to know.
No, they need to know, of course, but there are some times that it's impossible to have everything explained, I think, in the user story. No? The developer should know a bit more. This is the free version, I think. This is my impression. This is an opinion.
I don't know, the way I made it work, because it was not from QA 2.0 now, I was a QA 3.0. I went to my team, they didn't have a QA, so, but they care a lot about quality. But they had this gap maybe in the upper part of the pyramid, let's say, or this, what you're mentioning, like maybe testing manually, this part, they were not doing a lot because maybe the BA was covering that. And I sat with them and I told them, well, this is what I want to do. I want to develop with you and I want you to do testing. What do you need in order to feel more comfortable doing testing? And I don't want to be a gatekeeper because they were like, okay, we do the testing, we do everything, but then you do the final check. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that final check. What do you need? And we started doing some workshops in order to help them think about testing a bit more. We agreed on putting a lot of work in the user stories, like specifying them. We even created these QA notes that I was telling you. We even sometimes created mind maps together and then put that into story. And then the pairing was bidirectional. I mean, I was learning how to develop, but they were also learning how to test better with me. But they wanted to be there, you know. I didn't have to convince them. Yeah.
Once develop, I think that can help a lot.
Particularly in your situation, well, in the situation of being a QA and thinking about doing it, would you recommend any source or any specific path?
What did I do? I don't know, sometimes it's a bit difficult because all the resources are like very advanced. So someone that I like is Sandy Metz. He has a few books. Sandy Metz? She has a few books and she explains very well the basics. I'm going to do the propaganda here. I also like Codely TV a lot. They help me a lot. There's no one from Codely here, no? And then, I don't know, I've worked in pet projects to be able to practice myself. And then I think pairing was the thing that saved my, I don't know, saved me.
I have a question. Sorry.
I found myself trying to push my ideas into
QA people, like QA components, zero people. And one of the things that I get back more than once is like that they get the benefit of not knowing how it's done. So they talk about this black box approach where they test from outside and they do not know how it's done, and that gives them somehow an edge on because the idea is that if you know how it's done, how it's built inside, then you will test. That will influence the way you test, and you will test the way you work, right? The demo effect. It will work when you do it. So, what would you say to someone says that?
Probably, I don't know. I guess because this is the things. Yeah. I was taught this, like you have to do it that way because then you can be influenced. I don't know, like practice changed my. You have to do it. I don't know. I think the problem is that. What I was explaining about the testing pyramid, because you only know how to test from the outside, you are creating lots of tests at the top, and then you have these testing suits that they are impossible to work with. And I guess this is the moment where I realized, wow, this is not working. Like I have this test suite of end-to-end tests that is taking 4 hours to run. Like I don't know how to do in a different way, but this is clearly not working. But I guess if they are 1.0, they are not even there, no? Yeah. But like manual testing is really, really boring. Like, don't they want to try at least automating? Because maybe going from 1 to 3 is a lot, but maybe the next step can be automating. I think it's usually cool for people. I don't know. Yeah, it's. I'm not sure I have an answer. Sorry. I don't know if I have more time or there are more questions.
I have one
regarding what you said about pair programming. And I was wondering how it was a pair programming session that you had there and what led to zero.
Well, I had some knowledge coding, but my coding knowledge was from creating these end-to-end UI tests, okay, and from doing a few pet projects very badly. So they had a lot of patience with me. At the beginning, maybe I was watching a bit more, and then I was trying to drive more. Like it was very hard at the beginning. So at the beginning, they had to tell me almost everything that I needed to type. You know, there was people that was very nice to me, let's say, or I don't know, they were committed to my learning, and they would tell me, I remember I was telling them, well, maybe we need to switch, Juan, because now you need to, you need to have fun. And he was like, I already know how to do this, Aida, you can keep the whole day. I don't know, it's just patient, me studying a lot, like to be able to get there, and looking how things were done in the project, and I don't know, just little by little you start getting there. But yeah, as I said, it's hard. But I can compare maybe to teaching a junior developer, let's say, like someone that is their first job, and they start paying a company. So for me, it's the same.